Hey guys, welcome back to Seller Sessions. Today with me is Andy Arnott. Andy, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
No worries. It's been a while. I know we've done some A9 stuff a little while ago, didn't we? We were talking about the hunger score and a few other bits and pieces. Being
Yeah.
a programmer and stuff, you can speak of it from the language side of programming and stuff. So this kind of rolls quite nicely in today because I said to you, look, want to do a show. What techie shit have you got for us? And you said robotics, AI, and I'm like, yeah, that really got me excited. So, do you want to just give a quick background? I know you've been on the show before, brief background, and we'll start moving through some of this stuff, the machine learning, AI, and how that impacts on AMS and sellers and what they can do, even in the early stages.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been an entrepreneur pretty much my whole life. My first kind of launch was when I was 19 years old. I was doing chatbots on a little platform called ICQ, which if you're old enough, you know what that is. If you're young, you have no clue. But yeah, so I started that in around 19. That was kind of my first dabble in software as a service, and kind of getting into the programming side of things, kind of self-taught. And then that just evolved over the years. I had an Android app company super early on, got shut down by Google. So I lost a nice chunk of money in a single day. Is one of those kind of like you hear with Amazon shutdowns where I woke up one day and I was like, oh man, well, that money's gone, and did a bunch of appeals. And anyway, long story short, 2012 started the Amazon business because my wife wanted to be at home to raise our kids.
Mm.
I took off really quickly with having kind of the programming, SEO, all that kind of background. It really translated well into Amazon. So did Amazon for, I mean, till current day, but I'm scaling that back every year, and going into different endeavors. With the podcast. Amazon podcast was kind of my first, dipping my toes into that kind of realm, and decided actually just recently that's going to be kind of my new focus. I'm going to be doing a lot of podcasting, new media, stuff like that. And I'm going to try to build my own kind of new, podcast network. So if you're familiar with some of these, independent people that have come up and done their own podcast networks where they have multiple shows and get to cover a variety of issues, because, I'm into too much, but I really enjoy things like, technology, politics, geopolitics, all that kind of stuff. I'm one of those people who probably looks at news a little too often, but I really enjoy it. So that's sort of where I'm switching my focus. And then we're also really big into real estate as well. So
Yeah. Well, a little bit of advice for you from an old man. Don't watch the news. It just talks you.
oh, I know
Uh,
it does. It does. That's why I've scaled back a lot, especially on the political side of things.
yeah. The one when it comes to politics, is game over. Right. Where do you want to start? We're going to start with AI and machine learning. Where because obviously we've got to be careful on a podcast like this. Meaning is that we still have to translate that to the everyday listener and Amazon seller and the benefits that they're going to get from this. So where do you want to
Absolutely.
start with this, and then we can fold it back into the marketing, how they'll benefit and how they can start get going and get that competitive edge, because there's going to be a lot of sellers out there, they don't have a technical stack engineering team or anything like we do, right?
Right,
So
absolutely. So yeah, so
let
artificial
me ask you.
intelligence. Yeah, I'm going to give a quick background because you've probably heard it on the news,
Yeah.
and machine learning, things like that. These keywords like that. But if you're a layman and not too deep in that world, you kind of don't know what that means. So artificial intelligence, it's fancy, but honestly, the easy way to think about it is it's taking a massive amount of data and running it through a computer, which can decipher data thousands of times faster than humans, maybe millions, I'm not sure at this point.
Yeah.
And then taking all these data points and then being able to compare them, get a result, and then put it back through the system over and over again. And so what that does is, not only can you look at a single set of data, but you can look at multiple sets of data. So if you want to relate it to the Amazon world, and the A9 conversation was a perfect conversation because that's exactly what they're doing at Amazon, right? They're taking product photos, they're taking headlines, they're taking descriptions, they're taking number of clicks, they're taking conversion rate, they're taking all these different data points, and they're running it through their AI and machine learning and figuring out what converts the best, right?
Yeah,
Because
which comes
Amazon,
under feature selection. So
right? And
they take 150 features, bring them down to 50, bring them down to 20, and they'll throw some variables and features that could be number or text format as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, Amazon's goal is to make the most money, right, for their stockholders. So, the main goal of this machine algorithm is to maximize profits. And so every day they're tweaking it, right? So, to give you another example of how this would kind of work is, they give scores to things, right? So, in an Amazon product, maybe like the score is 10, maybe the photo is 15, maybe the the description is 5, the click rate is 7, whatever. And they constantly are also tweaking those values, right? So they're looking at all these different factors, deciding what's going to work best, and then deploying those changes in real time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting because I was speaking to my partner Ellis about this, and he comes, I suppose it's that technical purist point of view. So he's a statistician, he's an algorithm expert, data scientist. When it comes to machine learning, like he said, there's a kind of debate against the two because there's a more controlled environment when you're talking about statisticians versus the machine learning. He said, Dan, imagine this. Imagine machine learning is like a bag of hammers, and then you throw that bag of hammers. And it can get out of control or it can't get in control because it's not under controlled environment. But the guys in control of the bag of hammers tend to have what's the word for it? A lot of confidence, but they are effectively a bag of hammers. So it's almost like that kind of twitchy sneering at each other. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're looking from a technical point of view, and they don't fully agree with each other, and they're not like friendly towards each other. So they'd be quite snarky about it. And I thought it was hilarious, but
yeah,
way over my head. By the way.
No, for sure. And the other really interesting thing that you can throw into the whole mix is quantum computing, right? So if you don't know what quantum computing is, it's a new form of computing that instead of having a state of 1 or 0, you can have multiple states. And so that's going to add, instead of having hammers in that bag, you're now going to throw some sledgehammers in that bag. So all different sizes of hammers. Yeah. And because it's such a new technology, people don't know where that's going to take us. And unfortunately, more every day, we see that movies predict the future, right? If a human can imagine it, it's possible. I mean, just look at Elon Musk, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But, when you look at it in that point of view, what people don't realize is in the next 10 to 20 years, maybe even less, depending on how fast this moves. I mean, our world is going to change immensely. I mean, not only geopolitically, but and to tie it into, we're talking about this on our podcast the other day, is to tie that into the Amazon world. People really need to be prepared in terms of manufacturing, supply chain, depending on how all this geopolitical stuff shakes out. Either way, people are now all these countries are already starting to go, oh crap, we rely on China for manufacturing. We were relying on Russia for energy. We were relying on all these different countries for these different things, and when these things change so drastically, so quickly, it spooks everyone, right? So now you're going to see a lot of countries kind of go back to kind of this nationalist way of thinking and being in terms of day-to-day economy. So once again, energy. Europe's gonna have to try to either transition into green or find different sources of energy from friendly sources. But I think this is going to translate immensely into, everything. It's going to change everything, especially commerce.
With the war going on, biggest export out of Ukraine is wheat. So that's going to affect their general day-to-day living and food supply chain. And we work off a 90-day period of food supply chain across the world, roughly speaking. Then you've got metals that comes out there. They've got access to oil. They're not like number one or anything, but then you've got Russia, oil, gas, metals. So that's going to affect a lot's going on over in Shenzhen in the metal side of things because of computer dashboards and all the electronics and everything else. And then obviously petroleum and stuff with regards to plastics. So all of this is going to have a knock-on effect. We just don't know how much it's going to be a knock-on effect to raw materials as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because once again, unfortunately, like I said, I follow the news a little too much, but I'm one of those guys who looks at data, right? So I was hearing about the food shortage and things like that, and I said, okay, that's interesting, but I don't really trust the news anymore in terms of giving us, everybody's got their own point of view, right? So nowadays, I read and then I verify. So I went to the U.S. Agricultural website, and I started looking at some of the raw data, things like, fertilizer costing 30% more, weather, climate, dryness in the west coast of the U.S., which is where a lot of the food, majority of the food comes from, super dry weather. So there's going to be issues there as well. So there's all these different things in play. And the reason why I'm mentioning this in terms of Amazon e-commerce, a lot of these small businesses, it's going to directly affect you. These energy costs are going to greatly affect manufacturing costs. So manufacturing costs are going to go up. Shipping costs, were already high. Those are just going to continue to climb. So there's going to be all these different issues in play. And, if you're an established seller and you have a decent amount of money, my suggestion would be to start to diversify. And I don't mean diversify in terms of like, start selling on Shopify. I mean diversify in assets, in where you invest your money, and then also just in your personal life, having a place to plant some potatoes or things like that. Now, my wife calls me a doomsdayer, so, I'm talking worst case scenario. But my dad always said, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, right? So, that's kind of where we're at in terms of myself personally. But, I just really want people to start to think about that moving forward.
Well, that's the whole point of this show, is that the people that are implementing some of this stuff is going to add the edge, aren't they? Right? So they don't get caught by surprise. So, you're launching products and you may not be aware of this. You're doing all the research, you're getting development work done, etc., etc. And then suddenly when you go to place your first order of that product, then prices are shooting up, or the limitation of access to those materials. So it's hard to stay afloat and on top of everything, but it's mindful to know magpie and know bits of information that you can see what's coming around the corner as well. From going back to what you said in terms of the effects of AI and this kind of supply chain on a technical side, like we're already using AI. We have it at the agency. We develop everything in house, but most software out there for PPC is AI, or a rules-based system, aren't they? So people are using it from third parties. So it's not old news quite yet. It's more about the harnessing of this. But there's so much more that can be done as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're still at the infancy of AI, and so to take it into account of kind of how this could be put into play in the real world. So you made you had a great example in terms of PPC. So all these PPC softwares are looking at all this data, using machine learning because they have so many different data sets now, and then being able to come up with strategies that a human may not have been able to come up with because a human can't look at that much data, right? So that's a great example. Another kind of neat example. So OpenAI is a product that developers can get access to. Musk is an investor. I can't remember who the original creator is. I got super early access and I started playing with it, and that was my first kind of aha moment in terms of knowing that that's the future. If you don't learn what AI is, if you don't learn what machine learning is, if you don't learn this stuff now, your competitors are going to use it and put you out of business. So for example, if you go into certain software now, you can literally give it a sentence. So in terms of Amazon, you could give a title for your product and it could write the bullet points for you, and might even do a better job than you could do yourself, because it's going out and looking at, maybe 1,000 products that are similar and going, okay, these are the best selling products. What kind of format are they using? Where are they placing words? So a lot of this AI is even doing SEO, which I've noticed without even knowing it's doing SEO, right? Because it's looking at this data and kind of figuring out what's working, what's not working, and then forming this data, forming the words, the phrases, the placement, all of that kind of on its own. So that's another kind of real world example where you could see AI making a big difference.
Yeah. What about elsewhere? Is there any way, because one of the things is managing inventory and stuff like that. what's your experience there and the benefits of AI, machine learning, that kind of stuff in terms of the larger sellers? They've got 50 to 100 SKUs or more. It's complex because they're going marketplace and stuff like that. Any good suggestions there?
Yeah, so I don't know any. I can't suggest any software per se, but what I can tell you is on the data side of things, what you could look at are, once again, way more than a human. You could plug in things like, Chinese holidays. You could even pull from APIs about shipping times, right? Like from China to the US West Coast or wherever your port is. So combining that data, then adding in energy costs. So in other words, you could take all these different data sets, feed it into machine learning, and then machine learning would be able to tell you in kind of almost real time, you need to order X amount to get past all these issues. So that's really kind of how you could use it for supply chain. So the other really interesting thing, and another kind of use case that AI is doing, and once again, there's a bunch of different software. All you need to do is Google it. But things like writing Google ads, right? Like, so when you go to write a Google ad, you create a title and description and all that, and that's the one variation, right? And then they want you to fill in like 20 other. And you might do a decent job at that, but there's a lot of software now that will take the intent, look at all similar competitors who are also writing ads, and also write ads for you now as well.
Looks like we've lost Andy there. While we're waiting for Andy to come back, just want to let everyone know we're 37 days away from Branded by Women and Seller Sessions live in London, which is May 6th and on May 7th. The link's in the code below, which is live.sellersessions.com and also brandedbywomen.com. And there's also a 10% discount code, which is SSL10 and BBW10. I'm going to bring Andy back as he's just come back online. There he is.
Yeah, so that I would like to blame that on technical difficulties, but that was literally just fat fingers. I closed the tab by mistake, so I apologize for that. So what I was saying is AI also comes to being able to scale, right? So before in the past, if I wanted 100 ads written for to be able to A/B test or to test a bunch of different versions of ads, I'd have to hire a VA, right? That would be a human who would have to go through and write all those ads. Now with AI, I'm able to get 100 ads in a matter of minutes that then I can deploy, and the cost there is minimal, right? It's now maybe a flat fee or a small fee to get all that work done in a fraction of amount of time. So if you utilize and think about it in that sense, when it comes to scaling and things like that, you'll be able to do it much quicker. Now, I'm going to go into a whole kind of separate part of the discussion here, which is in the next 5 to 10 years, where does that leave humans, right? I mean, every single day, AI is taking the jobs of humans, right? So where does that leave us in the next 5, 10, 20 years? And that's another interesting discussion in terms of, commerce once again. Now, if humanoid robots or if these new technologies are going to replace a human, that any job that a human doesn't want to do, a robot's going to replace them in probably 5, 10, maximum 20 years. But if you look at what Elon Musk is doing, and that crazy alien, he's just pushing stuff out way quicker than anybody could ever imagine. So he's got a humanoid robot in development that he says is going to be ready by 2023, maybe 2024. And so think about it in terms of your trash man, somebody who cleans out a sewer, somebody, all these jobs that humans do now that may not be pretty. I have respect for no matter what job you do. I think that everybody's got their place, and my dad taught me that you treat everyone the same from the janitor up to the CEO, right? Like people are people, and it doesn't matter. Everybody's got. I mean, we learned this during the pandemic, right? I mean, the food service people and all that, who are just kind of like these faceless people that you'd go in and get your food from or whatever. And now it's like, oh, these, a lot of people didn't realize how important those jobs were.
Well, Well, it's the same. It's the oil rigs. It's the same as how can we use our mobile devices and everything? Because there's a whole matrix of your electrics. Someone has to go out and do those jobs, and some of these jobs are dangerous, and they're jobs that a lot of people don't want to do. But sometimes in life, people miss those because they're not on Instagram, they're not on, but they play an integral role in our society.
Right. And the other thing to think about is, so I used to be an air traffic controller. I worked for the government for 13 years. And, that's a prime example of a job that a computer will do a better job on. So same thing with a pilot, right? I mean, you're always probably going to have a human kind of, sitting there kind of overseeing what's going on. But so many jobs are going to be replaced. As humans, where are we going to go, right? Where are we going to get to? How are we going to make money, right? And so there's a discussion now that there's going to be a much bigger kind of draw and commerce around creativity, right? So art, music, those kinds of things are now going to be more of a income generation than the physical work, right? So if the guy who's building your house no longer builds your house anymore, there's a computer that controls a bricklaying machine that lays the house. Now there's somebody who might have to, make sure that machine continues to work. So there will still be jobs in that sense, but a lot of them are going to be super high tech. And I don't know if, as a world population, that we're prepared for that.
No, I don't. I mean, I remember seeing a Joe Rogan podcast with Elon Musk, and he was terrified of what the capabilities of AI has, right? So AI can't do the same lateral thinking as a human. There's so many things that they do. They can do the grunt work, they do calculations, but they don't have empathy. They don't have a soul. They don't have all of these different characteristics because they have to mimic what they see first in order to repeat it rather than it being inherent because they're a machine. But what happens is one day is when it starts to surpass that. Do you know what I mean? And then you think of interdynamics of relationships. How long is it until some crazy person starts dating a robot? Do you know what I mean? Where does that leave humanity? I don't want to go off course, but they are things that consider that could appear in our lifetime.
Right. And, my brother and I were having a discussion the other night, and one of the things that I kind of came up with, which I think may be true. So I'm a technologist. I love technology. I think it's super interesting. But as we progress, in the beginning, I think that technology was absolute gift to humanity, right? But I feel like we're sort of tipping over into the point of it being a detriment to humanity. So I'll give you an example. So before, even before COVID, but COVID, kind of pushed this even faster. When you went to a restaurant, when I was a kid, when I went out to a restaurant with my parents, we would all sit there and chat and connect. And same thing with friends, same thing with family members, other, extended family. You actually sat and had discussions and gave people your attention. Yeah. And I think the advent of the mobile phone, Steve Jobs being as brilliant as he was kind of the beginning of the end of technology, or maybe at least that was the start of technology, I guess, being opening data up to the world, but the start of the trail that we're going down now, which I think is a detriment, because now you go into a restaurant, you see the parents on their phones, you see the kids on the phones, there's very little human connection. And that's part of the reason why I think a lot of the world is at each other's throats now, right? Because before we connected as humans, and we were able to discuss differences. We were able to cordially, I don't agree with this issue, but we both agree on this issue. And how can we discuss and connect and come up with something that's better for everyone, And I think now we're so disconnected from other humans because we now go on social media. We have all these other kind of off ramps to quote unquote connect, but we're not actually connecting, right? We're staring at pixels.
And you're seeing kids sitting next to each other, instant messaging each other rather than that communication. And you've got to remember as well, when we think about the communication chain, you've got body language, you've got tone, facial expressions. But if you write something in a text format, that can be read so many ways depending on the triggers of that other person. It could mean nothing. It could mean everything. And so once you get into that online space and you start talking about politics, sex, religion, violence, all these different things. I mean, even with the Will Smith thing that kicked off this week, right? So there's a big debate: should he do it? Shouldn't he do it? And there's a lot of debate around that. And when that's in the written form, that can actually trigger people, and that's where the trolling and all that kind of stuff comes from. So we need to somehow get that blend right, where we've got the human contact. And like you said, going back to COVID, that point of connection and isolation versus human touch, right? And human communication. So when all the events opened up again, everyone went crazy, right? They just like they let out of prison, and it was back, you know, they could see people, they could speak, they could converse. And I think that taught a lot of people a lesson of introspection as well, of being locked down and isolated for so long, that they come back into the real world. But we need more of that, I suppose, not COVID or anything, but more of that integration back into society away from devices. I mean, me and you are now, we're lucky we can do this podcast because we're now communicating on a software platform that gets broadcasted to get the job done, to get content out there. We can't do this face to face with different countries. The numbers don't make up. Do you see what I mean? So you had the advantages and then you have the disadvantage. And that's why I think it's important of you have your online comms, but you've got to dedicate time for offline comms, your family, your friends, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas we move towards a culture of who picks up the phone and phones anyone anymore? It's not. They WhatsApp them. So the communication path has changed, isn't it? And some people get offended if you phone them. I'm old school. I prefer to pick up the phone. Does that make sense? So we are seeing a shift, or we're just a couple of old dinosaurs. I'm not sure, mate.
Yeah, it's one of those things once again where, technology is a blessing and a curse, right? And
yeah,
and yeah, I feel like, so what I've noticed and what we just moved states, into I'm in a state now that's a lot less populated and things like that, and I also think. This is my own personal opinion, of course, but I think that, and we were talking about this a little before we got on, that population density, I think, also has a huge effect on humans, right? I don't think we're meant to be in these massive cities where we're 6 inches from somebody all day long either, right? I mean, there's human connection, and then there's just like this like constant barrage of energy, right? So, I think, yeah, so I think. Yeah, I mean, my opinion is that we need to kind of go back to a little bit more of tribalism in terms of go local, right? So, and I would say that translates into the Amazon world hugely, because I think that if you make a lot of connections locally and you figure out a product that you can source locally, that you can have a relationship with somebody locally, it's a lot harder to do here in the U.S. and same thing in Europe right now because we shipped all our manufacturing off to China, but as that changes, I think that that's going to be a huge advantage in terms of retail if you're able to source either ultra local, like in your own city, state, general area, or even adjacent states, or in Europe, adjacent countries or your own country. I think that the closer that you're able to get your supply chain to you, the bigger your advantage is going to be moving forward.
Yeah. So moving back on the technological side, some marketing stuff. We know we've discussed Google Ads. Where else can we go with this in terms of other channels which will benefit Amazon sellers to start with machine learning or AI outside of PPC software, etc.?
Yeah, so I mean, some other really interesting ways that you could use some of this auto-generated stuff is auto-generated content, right? So taking kind of an idea of a blog post and then being able to write, maybe a paragraph of it, and then have AI help you fill in the blanks in terms of really making that article rich and longer and full of keywords. In the product side of things, that could work wonders in terms of being able to talk about your product and then having AI maybe go into, the background of the product or, something similar that will fill content. So, if you're on Amazon, it's the same thing as off Amazon. So if you're on Amazon and you fill out majority of your product listing, you're going to get more SEO juice, right? You're going to get much more visibility. Same thing with that off of Amazon. So on Shopify, or if you have a blog or something like that, having AI help you fill in more data to have more chance of, somebody, another machine. That's what's funny is, we're getting to the point now where it's machine talking to machine almost, right? There's so much because Google now is an AI system that's now going out to look at this data. So that's another really interesting kind of dynamic is, before it was, at the beginning of AI, it was AI looking at human data. Now it's AI looking at human data and other AI data, right? So that's kind of another interesting way that it's flowing. And then for marketing, it's also data, right? So luckily, a lot of platforms already do this for you, things like Google Analytics and all this. But if you really want to get deep into using AI for marketing, it might have to be something that you create yourself. But once again, that's also a lot easier now in terms of, pre-made APIs, things where you can pull data together on your own. And be able to build data sets that maybe your competitors don't have. I mean, this was probably more advanced for some of the larger sellers, but with relatively a minimal amount of money, you can tie multiple APIs, use machine learning to then glean competitive advantages in terms of maybe launching products, maybe finding products that have high interest but low selection. Maybe even getting into, so another really interesting thing that's being used right now is using AI in manufacturing, right? So I read recently that the Air Force developed their next generation fighter in a week using AI, which would have taken them years in the past. Now, that's going to iterate. But it's one of these things where if you can really understand and deploy AI for whatever business model, whatever business you're in terms of Amazon, it could be taking, like I said, maybe the brand analytics data, and combining it with, maybe some data from Walmart and eBay and combining all that data and seeing maybe what's trending on 3 platforms instead of just Amazon, and then being able to make a really informed decision on what to source next or what to manufacture, or maybe being able to take reviews from multiple platforms and looking at the reviews and finding out what is kind of the overwhelming theme on what they like or don't like, and then being able to take that data to your product and say, okay, so I sell a hammer. There's tons of people saying that they would love the hammer to have a magnet on the left side of it so that they can hold additional nails, so they don't have to go into their pocket to continue to hammer nails in as they build a home, or the grip on a power tool gets too hot, so maybe we wrap it in silicone. Things like that. That a human would not be able to do in order to collect all that data, decipher that data, and then have an output that's actually actionable, right?
Indeed. I'm just going to go to a comment here from Side B. AI takes away human creativity in the content. It can certainly help with SEO, but definitely no substitute for the real deal creativity. Goes back to the point earlier on, what you were saying, Andy, is that it can do all the grunt work. Let's just say you are hyper creative, but you've got a long piece to write. If it helps generate some of those fresh ideas that the person can rewrite, they're not starting from scratch. So it's including the human element rather than going, okay, that is the finished product at the end. It's the same with if you use PPC software AI based, right? You're still the pilot. You still need to look at it, but it's doing the grunt work if you've got 700 SKUs. And so there are the benefits. It's not the whole piece. But I think what we're talking about here is one day it will be, they'll be so advanced that those gray areas where it misses out and we can see as humans it's not working will eventually start to evaporate. And that's what gets scary as well, because that becomes replaceable rather than a complement.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to give you another interesting example of this, so like I said early on, I had access to the OpenAI kind of playground, they call it. And like I said, as I'm building a podcast network, one of the podcasts I do is children's stories, and it just so happens that for years I've been recording stories that I would tell my kids in the evening before I put them to bed. And my wife was like, "Oh, why aren't you recording that?" And so I started recording them, and I had a huge catalog, and I was like, "Oh, someday I'll launch that," And I finally decided to do it. But as I'm moving forward, it's really cool in terms of I can type a couple of sentences. on the creative side of things. So seeing AI is not creative at all is not true, because I'm able to put a couple of sentences about a story idea maybe I have, and it will literally fill in, another paragraph of content. Now, it might not be content that I use. I might not use that, as part of the story, but it gets me thinking like, oh, well, that's an interesting concept, And the other thing I did was I typed in like Luke Skywalker walked into the star ship, and Darth Vader, ignited his lightsaber, and then it like finished the rest of the paragraph in a quite interesting storyline. I mean, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And once again, that was kind of the aha moment for me, seeing that this technology is in its infancy, and I need to know. I need to know and understand it, right? It was kind of like when they called it Web 2.0, when the commerce was kind of coming to the web. The people that were on there early, I mean, just look at Amazon, right? I think 1996 was when it was up. So it's also, there's a lot of different elements when it comes to being successful, right? It's one of them is, systems, knowing the basics of business, all those kinds of things. But it's also very much, I can't remember the Wayne Gretzky quote exactly, but it's like skate to where the puck's going to be. So much of business is knowing and understanding the future,
going to where the puck's going, not where it's at.
Yeah, right. And so it's getting to that point before other people do, because that early mover advantage can be the difference between $1 million business and $100 million business, right? Mm. There's also another nuance to that, though, in terms of knowing when it's gonna work, right? Because if you're too early, it's not gonna work. And I run into that problem a lot. I'm like, oh, this is like offsite traffic. I was talking about that like 4 years ago, right? I was just too early to the game. Because people hadn't kind of accepted that, that theory for Amazon. But if you can hit that sweet spot, so TikTok, once again, short form video, that's been out, that was a concept. I can't remember, was it the Twitter Periscope that first did that short form video? I can't remember, but there were other platforms that were very much similar to TikTok, but it just the world wasn't ready for it yet, right? So. Once again, to me, in my mind, the e-commerce world, as all these different factors go into play, being local, sourcing local, I think is going to be a huge early mover advantage. So, like, if you start working on that today, 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, when all this stuff starts breaking, you're gonna be safe and sitting pretty. The other thing to think about is physical assets, right? So the dollar, the euro, the pound, all of that, as the West starts transitioning into, there's this big push for digital currency. That's probably going to devalue our money even more. So, taking those assets, buying lots of, so if you can buy lots of inventory now, that's a hedge against future inflation. That's a hedge against supply chain issues. So, if you have a massive warehouse that you can stock full of product, that's again, an early mover advantage, right? Because if you just look at the data, you can predict the future, probably at a 90% reliability in terms of shipping costs going up because energy costs are going to go up, manufacturing costs going up. There was articles about China having another kind of surge of COVID. So all these things, we're not going down anytime soon, right? The cost of a physical asset, that's not going down anytime soon. What's going to go down are some of these, stocks, digital assets, things that aren't tangible. Those are going to be a little bit harder, in my opinion. This is all my opinion. I can't I don't have a portal to the future, but just I'm a data guy. I also take in a lot of different angles from a lot of different sources, and so that's kind of where I see it.
We're going back to what you're saying early to market and stuff. There's a boxing metaphor that says speed beats power, but timing beats everything.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of the time when we talk about in business, we talk about speed to market, but really it's the timing plus speed. Yeah. In that case, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another, easy example to look at would be like MySpace, Friendster, things like that. Like they were social networks years before Facebook, but Facebook, by the time Facebook came out, they had a slightly different spin and the world was ready for it, right? I mean, they were like, okay, we get this technology now. We've dabbled on MySpace and we've dabbled on Friendster. Yeah, that was okay, but that's not quite what we were looking for. Where Facebook came in and kind of nailed it in terms of you know making a much cleaner interface. MySpace, I don't know if you remember, it's just an ugly mess, right? It was like looking at what were that free GeoCities. I don't know if you remember. We're dating ourselves here. Danny and I probably know what GeoCities is. Yeah. It was like this free website service, and people would put up the ugliest web pages in the world, right? But that's kind of all that was available. And so these iterations of technology, right? That's why I keep telling people Amazon. In my opinion, Amazon is kind of the MySpace or the Friendster of e-commerce, and nobody can wrap their heads around that because they're such a powerhouse, and right now they're trudging ahead. But in my mind, there's going to be a better solution to that. I still see that tied much more to social. I still don't understand why Facebook hasn't done. They've kind of had their little local marketplace and stuff, and that's interesting, but. To me, Facebook is leaving. They had the first loss like ever, right? Recently, and they lost like $250 billion in stock value, I think it was, or something like that. Crazy loss. And all I could think about when I heard that is like, well, they could easily make that back in 6 months with an agile team that pushed out an e-commerce platform that. Integrated social and trust, right? Hey, Danny bought this rubber spatula and he friggin' loves it. I'm like, cool, I need a spatula. Bam, I buy it, right? Like, who do you trust more than your friends, right? Than people that you actually know. Reviews on Amazon, it's some rando who could be, somebody in Bangladesh who dropped a fake comment there, or bought the product. It's just there's not a lot of trust even today, even though they've cracked down a lot on Amazon reviews, right? But if you're getting real reviews from real friends, that's super powerful.
It's weird because social commerce, the bubble of that really kicked off and now moving into mobile commerce and everything was as early as 2011, 2012, from TechCrunch and everything else. That's when we expected the explosion that didn't come.
Right. And once again, I think it was too early, right? I think that people were not used to shopping online. I mean, COVID, once again, pushed so many more people online to e-commerce, right? But I think that if Facebook did it right, not only with frictionless payment, and then put a lot of the social trust into that platform, and then bought FedEx or partnered with FedEx or somebody who else already has all the distribution, all the logistics dialed in, you're talking about, to me, in my opinion, something you couldn't stop. Not only that, but Facebook has. More users, way more users than Amazon, right? I think it's like they're over 1 billion users on Facebook. So just sheer numbers. Yeah. If you give them the option to shop there, I personally would shop there, right? Wouldn't you?
Yeah, but it's just not being. It's not a frictionless environment that's got everything that you need. Amazon is the everything store. That's why it's the convenience factor. It's just how you're going to get everyone to pivot at that scale over there and provide the inventory. That's where the sellers come in.
To me, the easy kind of solution to that would be to be the loss leader, right? So court all the third-party sellers by saying, we're not going to charge you a monthly fee. We're not going to charge you, a referral fee, like none of that, right? Because they already have the users. It's not like they have to spend money to get these users on their platform. So if you court those third-party sellers, and you for 2 or 3 years, you give them, zero fees and you do it as a break even thing. I know I don't have any, loyalty to Amazon where I'm like, oh, I can't leave Amazon. They've been so good to me. I don't feel that way. I don't know many sellers who have that kind of loyalty. Right.
No, that's true. So where do you want to wrap them, mate? Is there anything you want to kind of pinpoint before we sign off?
Well, I mean, the main thing is, I kind of went off on a tangent, kind of brain dumped here on a lot of the things that I've been thinking about over the last few months. And thank you for letting me do that, because that's when I have the most fun, is when I'm kind of able to go down these different rabbit holes.
I was going to say, do you have some links? Because some of the stuff that we've discussed, some of the tools, it'd be really good to get them for the show notes, and I'll publish them in the comments here as well.
Yeah,
so people got something to take a look at for themselves,
Yeah, so I dropped a few links in the Google Doc here, but let me I'll drop them here. Just some stuff to take a look at. In terms of myself, I don't have anything that they'll dive deeper on now, but like I said, in terms of building my podcast network,
Yeah.
a technology podcast will probably will make the docket at some point. I'm just trying not to scale that too quickly, just in terms of time. But there's a few links. Once again, OpenAI is the product I was talking about in terms of being able to play in a playground that's kind of plain language,
Yeah.
and able to for the layman to go in and just start playing with AI. I don't know if they're open yet. They might still be in beta. You might have to apply for it. I'm not positive. No, it looks like they aren't. So I think anybody can go in and try that out. So that's where I'd start too if you want to kind of dig in. OpenAI also has a bunch of community and articles and stuff that you can really dig into and kind of get your feet wet there. Yeah, I mean, so action points now would be, YouTube is a marvelous thing, right? Just go to YouTube and type in, machine learning in marketing, or how machine learning is going to change the future. How can you use machine learning for your business? Things like that. And you'll have some of these experts from like Amazon and Microsoft and stuff really,
Yeah.
break down some of the technology that they're using and where they're going to see it go.
And also Amazon.science as well, because there's a lot of published papers on there. There's not so much of the A9 stuff I could find on there, but they are doing a lot of stuff, especially around voice search and things like that as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's going to be another interesting thing to see, is how much these technology companies are going to share what they're doing, right? So a lot of people are upset with OpenAI because it's not open source, but there are a lot of open source alternatives that are coming out. So I'm glad for that, because once again, if there's a single company that controls something like AI, right, going into the future, to me that's extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to see kind of some of the offshoots of that. Let me see. I actually just saved one. If you want,
I've just been publishing in the comments now. Yeah.
okay, perfect. Yeah, and then so let me see. Let me grab and go into Pocket here real quick and show you some of the open source stuff that I just found. If you want that, give me
Yes,
one second
please.
here. Hopefully,
While you're doing that, I'm just going to go to Amazon.science and see if there's anything there
Yep.
for listeners that they
Okay,
should
so
include.
yeah, so yeah, some companies are open sourcing. So LinkedIn researchers open source FastTree SHAP, which is for relationships. So that's interesting. Copilot is another one, that's an open source alternative to GPT-3, which is the what OpenAI calls their algorithm. So that's one to check out. But yeah, so there's a lot of really cool products coming out. If you want something to generate data, kind of like what I was talking about in terms of like ads and blog posts or something like that, I've been using PepperType, peppertype.ai. And it's not the best, but it's decent. It's pretty cool. And I think they have a trial. So if you just want to go poke around and kind of see, that'll give you a really good idea of, rather than hearing us talk about it, being able to go in there and like generate some real
Yeah,
world
I mean,
examples.
the point of this discussion is to open people's minds to look at it and then do their own research. But yeah,
Absolutely.
you can't deep dive onto a podcast
Yep.
with in depth on it, but it's just to try and idea generation for those who are looking to get an additional edge, where to look and what to factor in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, to me, understanding this technology sooner rather than later is going to really put you at a large competitive
Exactly.
advantage. Yep.
Exactly. Cool. All right. Best way that people can reach you.
LinkedIn is where I'm on the most. Facebook seems to love to ban me. So you can find me on Facebook. In my Facebook group, I poke around in there. LinkedIn is by far where I'm at the most. Seller Roundtable podcast, check me out
Yeah.
there, and then my new kid story podcast called Kid Stories Podcast. So check that out. It's a dragon with kind of a bright pink background. My kids absolutely love the stories. So it's dragons and trolls and fun things like that. And what's fun about that is, when I was recording, my littlest, who's now my oldest, would be like, talking in the background. So I've edited it out a little bit, but you'll still kind of hear him in the background and stuff. So the professional stuff will come after I run out of the original content. But I've been having a lot of fun doing that. It brings me a lot of joy because I know my kids listen to these podcasts, these children's podcasts, and just light up. So
excellent. Guys, thank you for joining us today. Sharon will be back in the chair tomorrow. You'll see me next week. Kicking off the week will be Izabela. You'll see me Tuesday and Wednesday. And, of course, Sharon back on Thursday. Take care of yourself and your family. Much love, and I'll see you again next week.